The day had started like any other, quiet and ordinary, but Emma sensed something unusual from the moment she stepped into the living room. Her stepbrother, Jake, was sitting on the couch, fidgeting with something small in his hands, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips. Emma frowned, curious but cautious, because Jake's mischievous grins often meant trouble. He had a way of making ordinary things feel like adventures, like he carried a secret world in his eyes, and today, that world seemed closer than ever. She walked over, trying to look casual, pretending not to notice the way his gaze lingered on her just a little too long. Jake held up a pair of old metal handcuffs, the kind used for Halloween parties or silly pranks. He waved them with a playful flair, teasing, "Got a minute for a little fun, Emma?" Emma rolled her eyes but smiled, thinking she knew exactly what he meant, a harmless joke, a tiny escape from boredom. But Jake's grin didn't fade, it grew sharper, more determined, and Emma realized too late that he wasn't just joking. Before she could protest, Jake clicked one of the cuffs around her wrist, the cold metal biting gently into her skin. She gasped, startled, and he froze for a moment, as if realizing the weight of the gesture. But instead of immediately unlocking it, he attached the other cuff to his own wrist, locking them together. The key sat on the table behind them, just out of reach, teasing, and Emma's heart skipped a beat at the sudden closeness. Jake laughed nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "I thought it would be funny," he said, his voice catching slightly, betraying an unspoken tension. Emma's mind raced, part amusement, part panic. Her parents were upstairs. She knew they could come down at any moment, and the thought of being caught like this made her cheeks warm. "Brother, take off the handcuffs," the words slipped out before she could think, urgent, almost breathless. Jake shook his head, half smiling, half serious, saying, "Not yet, just a minute, I promise, it's not what you think." But Emma could feel the electricity in the air, the silent understanding that this moment was more than a prank. It wasn't supposed to be romantic, she told herself, but the closeness, the accidental brush of his hand, the way their eyes met, it stirred something unfamiliar, something dangerous to name. They sat on the floor together, back against the door, the metal chain between them a constant reminder of how close they were. Jake's eyes flicked to hers constantly, searching, hesitant, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. Emma noticed the small details she had never paid attention to before, the way his jaw tightened when he was nervous, the small scars on his knuckles from skateboarding, the way his hair fell into his eyes just slightly, giving him a softer look. Her pulse quickened, and she looked away, pretending to adjust her wrist, but Jake caught her glance, holding it for a moment too long. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, each second stretching out as if time itself had slowed just for them. Outside the living room, the soft voices of their parents drifted down from upstairs, carrying laughter and the faint sound of music, oblivious to the tension in the room below. Emma's mind jumped between worry and something more complicated, something that made her chest ache in a strange, unfamiliar way. She thought about all the times Jake had been around, how they had grown up in the same house, shared holidays, fights, secrets. But this moment felt different, charged with feelings that had always been just beneath the surface, hidden behind the label of brother and sister, the walls of family, the rules they had followed without questioning. Jake finally shifted, leaning a little closer, careful not to cross a line, his shoulder brushing hers, a small, almost innocent touch, but enough to make Emma shiver. "I didn't mean to scare you," he murmured, his voice low, full of an emotion she couldn't place. Emma shook her head, trying to breathe normally, trying to act calm, but her heart refused to cooperate, hammering against her ribs like it wanted to break free. She tried to smile, to make it light. "I know," she said, her voice catching slightly, betraying her own confusion. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the words they didn't say, all the feelings they had buried over years of familiarity and distance. Jake's fingers tapped nervously against the metal chain, and Emma realized just how much control they had over each other, how the smallest gesture could feel monumental. The cuff wasn't just metal, it was a symbol, binding them together in a way that no one else could understand. Emma felt a mix of fear and longing, the fear of being caught, the fear of admitting how she felt, and the longing for the closeness, the secret connection that suddenly felt like it had always been there, waiting for a moment like this to reveal itself. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, each heartbeat echoing in the small living room. They tried to talk about other things, distracting themselves with small talk, but the conversation faltered, words heavy with unspoken meaning. Jake's eyes followed Emma constantly, like he was memorizing her, storing every detail of her expression, the way her hair fell across her face, the subtle curve of her smile, the flicker of emotion in her eyes when she looked at him. Emma felt exposed and understood at the same time, a strange contradiction that made her pulse race. The thought of their parents coming down added tension, every creak of the stairs, every distant laugh made Emma jump slightly. "Brother, take off the handcuffs," she whispered again, softer this time, almost pleading, almost a test to see if he would do it. Jake hesitated, caught between the rules of propriety and the silent truth in the room. He knew that nothing inappropriate had happened, and yet, the closeness, the way their feelings had quietly shifted, made it impossible to ignore the electric tension. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, trying to think rationally, but her heart was in chaos. She remembered all the small gestures of care Jake had shown over the years, the moments when he had noticed her sadness, or made her laugh when she wanted to cry. Those memories now carried a weight, a depth she hadn't realized before. And in that instant, locked together by a simple pair of handcuffs, she understood that this moment, accidental and fleeting, had the power to change everything between them. Jake shifted again, the metal chain rattling slightly, and Emma felt the warmth of his body closer than she had ever allowed herself to notice. They were still brother and sister, in name and family, but in this moment, they were something else entirely, two people bound by circumstance, by proximity, and by feelings too complex to name. The handcuffs, meant as a joke, had become a mirror, reflecting the truths they had hidden from each other, the emotions they had buried under years of familiarity. Emma realized that fear and desire could coexist, that attraction did not always need to cross a line to be powerful. The voices upstairs continued, a reminder of the world beyond their small living room, the world that expected them to be ordinary, normal, family. But in this quiet, charged space, ordinary was impossible, and normal was irrelevant. They were two people confronting feelings they had never dared to speak aloud, discovering a connection that was as thrilling as it was forbidden. And though neither of them would act impulsively, the realization hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, that their bond was shifting, transforming into something neither could ignore. Emma leaned back slightly, her head brushing the door, trying to collect her thoughts. Jake's eyes never left her, and she noticed the soft, almost hesitant way he watched her, a tenderness that made her stomach flutter. Time seemed to stretch, each second magnifying the closeness, the intimacy of being together in such a strange, accidental way. The handcuffs had created a pause, a bubble where the world outside could not reach them, where nothing mattered except the silent understanding passing between them. Finally, Jake shifted again, careful, deliberate, as if testing the boundaries. Emma's pulse raced, and she realized that she was both terrified and exhilarated, caught between fear of being caught and the intoxicating proximity of someone she had always known, yet suddenly felt she was seeing for the first time. The living room, once ordinary, now felt charged, full of potential and tension, the quiet metal cuffs a symbol of the emotional chains they had both ignored for years. And as they sat there, hands linked by metal, hearts linked by unspoken truth, the ordinary day had become extraordinary, the simple prank turning into a moment that neither would forget. The click of the key on the table, small and metallic, reminded them both that reality still existed, that the world beyond this room still expected normalcy. But for a fleeting, suspended moment, nothing else mattered. Emma and Jake understood, silently, that life had shifted, that a new awareness of each other had awakened, delicate, complicated, and beautiful. And even as fear of discovery lingered, they felt a thrilling certainty, a knowledge that something had changed between them forever. Something that would echo in the quiet of their hearts long after the handcuffs fell away. The metal cuffs had been removed, the sound of the lock clicking free echoing softly in the living room. Emma rubbed her wrists, feeling the faint sting of the cold metal, but her mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts and emotions she couldn't easily name. Jake sat beside her on the floor, leaning back against the couch, the weight of silence settling between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Their parents were still upstairs, laughter and conversation drifting down like a distant reminder of a world they were temporarily apart from. Emma felt her chest tighten, a strange mixture of relief and longing, relief that the cuffs were gone, longing that the closeness, the intimacy of being physically connected, had vanished so quickly. Jake broke the silence first, his voice low, careful, almost hesitant. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure herself. "My wrist hurts, but I'll be fine," she said, brushing off the question with a soft laugh. He didn't respond immediately, just watched her, his eyes lingering on her face, tracing the curve of her jaw, the subtle movements of her lips, the way her eyes reflected both caution and curiosity. There was a quiet intensity in him, a seriousness that made Emma's heart flutter unexpectedly. She had always known Jake, always been aware of his presence, his jokes, his teasing, but now, under the weight of that moment, she saw him differently, more fully, as someone who mattered to her in ways she had never admitted, even to herself. They started to talk, trying to fill the room with words, to ease the tension that still hummed between them. Jake spoke first, about his day, about school, about small frustrations and moments of joy. Emma listened, nodding, offering comments, but their conversation kept circling back to that moment with the cuffs, as if both were afraid to name it directly but unable to ignore it. She remembered all the times Jake had been there, silently supportive, quietly attentive, noticing her moods without needing to ask. And she realized that she had taken that care for granted, assuming it was normal, part of growing up with a stepbrother. But now, she understood it differently, as a sign of something deeper, a connection that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. Jake shifted closer, careful, almost as if measuring the space between them, giving her room but not too much. Emma felt the brush of his shoulder, and her heart skipped a beat, a jolt of awareness reminding her how much proximity could mean, how easily emotions could shift. They spoke about college, about the coming months, about the future, and every word carried a subtle weight, every sentence layered with meaning beyond the literal. Emma admitted quietly, almost to herself, that she was scared of leaving, scared of losing the small, safe world they shared in that house. Jake listened, his expression softening, and in his eyes, she saw understanding, empathy, and something more, a quiet acknowledgement that he felt the same. Time moved differently in that room, slowed by the intensity of their unspoken feelings. Emma remembered small gestures Jake had made over the years, how he had always been aware of her needs, sometimes anticipating them before she could ask. And now, with the memory of the handcuffs, the closeness they had forced, she felt those gestures more deeply, more personally. It was as if a door had opened, a hidden layer of connection that had always existed, now impossible to ignore. She realized that the physical closeness had awakened emotional truths, feelings she had never named, feelings she hadn't realized she carried. Jake finally spoke about his own fears, about leaving high school, about uncertainty, about how he had always felt a little apart from others, but never from her. Emma listened, her hand brushing against his by accident, lingering a fraction longer than necessary. They didn't pull away, didn't comment, but the small contact amplified the emotions they had both been trying to keep under control. It was intimate without being romantic, intense without crossing lines, but undeniably powerful. Emma realized that attraction and care could exist together without needing a label, that emotional closeness could be just as thrilling as romance, and sometimes more meaningful. Jake leaned back, resting against the couch, and Emma followed, sitting beside him, careful not to close the distance too much but unable to keep herself far away. They talked quietly about memories, about family, about the little things they remembered from childhood, the jokes, the holidays, the moments of shared laughter. And with every word, the emotional bond between them deepened, the awareness of each other growing, subtle but undeniable. Emma felt her chest tighten, a mix of comfort and tension, as if the room itself was charged with unspoken feelings. Jake's presence was steady, reassuring, yet it carried a quiet intensity, an emotional weight that made her aware of every gesture, every look, every breath. They paused often, moments of silence stretching, comfortable yet tense, filled with the knowledge that they were navigating something new, fragile, and important. Emma remembered the way Jake had always been there in small, unnoticed ways, how he had supported her without demanding recognition, how he had understood her moods without words. And now, after the handcuff incident, that understanding felt more intimate, more personal, more poignant. She realized that closeness could exist without romance, that love could be protective and tender without needing to cross boundaries. And yet, she could not deny the flutter in her chest, the warmth that spread through her when Jake looked at her, the silent communication that needed no words. Jake spoke about his own awareness of change, of growing up, of realizing that life was moving fast and that they had to face new responsibilities, new challenges. Emma nodded, listening, her fingers brushing the floor as if grounding herself, trying to hold on to normalcy while feeling her emotions spiral gently out of control. She thought about what it meant to leave, to face the future without the daily presence of someone who had always been a part of her world. And she understood, quietly but clearly, that the bond they shared was stronger than she had ever admitted, more profound than casual affection, more lasting than ordinary friendship. Jake reached out, almost instinctively, his hand hovering near hers, not touching, just close enough that she could feel the warmth. Emma's breath caught, and she realized that this was a moment they would remember, a quiet, suspended instant that crystallized everything they had felt but never spoken. They didn't need words to acknowledge the intensity, the unspoken longing, the quiet admiration that had built up over years of shared experiences. It was emotional intimacy, subtle but powerful, a gentle adult connection that carried the weight of mutual respect, care, and unspoken desire. Emma understood that this connection could exist without crossing any boundaries, that closeness did not always require physical romance, that understanding and emotional presence could be just as meaningful. They talked about their parents briefly, the casual mentions of daily routines and responsibilities, but every word carried undercurrents of emotion, every sentence touched by the awareness of what they had shared. Emma felt the pulse of life in that room, the quiet rhythm of two people discovering each other in new ways, learning the depth of connection possible without needing to rush or force anything. Jake's presence was steady, grounding, but also exciting, a paradox that made her heart race and settle at the same time. They laughed softly about past misadventures, stories from childhood, and minor embarrassments, but even the laughter carried subtle tension, a reminder of the closeness, the intimacy, the emotional honesty now present between them. As the afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting gentle shadows across the room, Emma realized that nothing would be the same. The handcuffs had been a catalyst, an accidental trigger for awareness, and now the space between them was charged with understanding, recognition, and a tender emotional bond. She looked at Jake, and for the first time, really looked at him, noticing details she had never allowed herself to focus on before, the warmth of his eyes, the careful way he carried himself, the quiet strength that balanced vulnerability. And in that glance, she saw reflected her own feelings, mirrored, acknowledged, understood. Jake's glance met hers, steady, sincere, and she realized they were both aware of the emotional shift, both navigating it with care, both recognizing the depth of what had passed between them. The sound of footsteps on the stairs reminded them that the world outside their room still existed, that their parents would eventually return, that ordinary life would resume. But in that suspended moment, Emma and Jake existed in a private bubble, a space defined by emotional honesty, quiet longing, and mutual understanding. They didn't speak about romance, didn't name desire, didn't cross lines, but the intensity of the connection was undeniable. Emma felt the warmth in her chest, the subtle flutter of anticipation, the gentle ache of awareness that they had both discovered something profound. And Jake, too, felt it, the quiet, steady knowledge that their bond had shifted forever, that they had crossed an invisible threshold in understanding and emotional presence. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows in the room, they finally stood, stretching, moving apart slightly, but neither wanting to break the connection entirely. Emma glanced at Jake, a soft, knowing smile passing between them, and he returned it, a mixture of relief, recognition, and quiet happiness. They knew the moment was fleeting, but its impact would linger, shaping the way they saw each other, shaping the bond that had always existed but had never been fully acknowledged. And as they went about the rest of their day, the awareness of emotional closeness, subtle attraction, and deep connection stayed with them, quietly, persistently, beautifully. The key rested in Jake's palm, cold and metallic, yet heavy with anticipation. Emma sat beside him, her wrist brushing against his accidentally, and they both flinched at the contact, though neither pulled away. The laughter and chatter of their parents floated down from upstairs, a distant reminder of the ordinary world. But for Emma and Jake, time had slowed, the air thick with unsaid words, with feelings that had quietly settled between them over the last hours. Jake looked at the key and then at Emma, unsure whether to unlock the handcuffs immediately or prolong the intimacy that had grown from the incident. Emma's eyes followed his movements, her heart thumping in a rhythm that made her aware of every subtle motion, every tiny gesture, every unspoken thought. Finally, he moved, gently lifting the metal from his wrist, and then hers, the click echoing softly in the room. Emma exhaled, a mixture of relief and longing flooding through her. The cuffs were gone, but the closeness, the unspoken tension, the emotional intimacy remained, heavier now, more defined. Jake studied her face carefully, as if memorizing every detail, the slight flush in her cheeks, the faint sparkle in her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips. Emma met his gaze, a mix of curiosity, caution, and something deeper, a soft warmth that neither of them had named yet. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, breathing quietly, aware that the world outside was waiting but choosing to savor this private, suspended instant. Footsteps sounded faintly from upstairs, and Emma's pulse jumped, a reminder that normal life was approaching again. Jake quickly pocketed the key, careful, deliberate, and Emma adjusted her sleeves, brushing imaginary lint from her clothes. Their parents appeared in the doorway, smiling, unaware of the tension that had filled the room just moments before. Jake and Emma straightened, exchanging a quick glance that carried relief, recognition, and an unspoken agreement. They walked toward their parents calmly, laughing softly about nothing, their hands brushing lightly but naturally as they passed, a subtle echo of the intimacy they had shared. The ordinary rhythm of life resumed, but nothing would ever feel quite ordinary again. Later that evening, Emma and Jake retreated to their rooms separately, yet both found themselves staring at the ceiling, thinking of the same moments, the same gestures, the same warmth that had lingered between them. Emma recalled the way Jake's eyes had held hers, the subtle strength in his presence, the quiet care he always carried. She realized that the feelings she had always dismissed as simple affection were more complicated, layered, profound. Jake, too, reflected on the day, on how a simple prank with old handcuffs had turned into a revelation of emotions he had never fully acknowledged. He thought about the comfort of Emma's presence, the way her laughter eased his worries, the way her smile brightened ordinary moments. And he understood that their bond, though familiar, was now richer, deeper, more emotionally significant than either had expected. Days passed, but the memory of the living room, of the handcuffs, of the quiet closeness, remained vivid. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile carried a new awareness, a gentle tension that neither ignored. They found themselves seeking small moments together, not out of obligation, but out of a need to maintain the emotional connection that had awakened. Emma would linger in the kitchen when Jake was making tea. Jake would pause by her door with a question that could have been asked in minutes but stretched into meaningful seconds. The ordinary became extraordinary, the mundane filled with significance, because every interaction carried the weight of understanding, care, and quiet affection. Emma noticed the subtle changes in Jake, too, the way he seemed more attentive, more patient, more aware of the small details in her behavior. She realized that the handcuff incident had not only revealed emotions, but it had also allowed them to act on them without needing words. Small gestures, small touches, small acknowledgments became their private language, a way to navigate feelings too complex to name. They shared moments of laughter, of light teasing, of quiet companionship that deepened their understanding of each other. Emma felt a warmth in her chest whenever Jake looked her way, subtle but undeniable, a constant reminder that their bond was now more nuanced, more emotionally charged. Jake, meanwhile, recognized a new sensitivity in himself, a desire to be near Emma, to protect her, to care for her in ways that were more than simple sibling responsibility. He realized that their relationship had shifted, grown beyond the ordinary definitions, into a connection that was emotional, tender, and profoundly meaningful. Every shared memory, every quiet moment, every conversation carried an undertone of intimacy that neither needed to label but both acknowledged silently. Even ordinary routines became opportunities to connect, to share emotion, to explore the quiet bond that had been strengthened by the handcuff incident. One afternoon, they found themselves alone in the living room again, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting soft shadows on the floor. They sat together, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally touching, and yet neither spoke of the past incident directly. The air was filled with unspoken words, with silent acknowledgement of feelings that were complex but pure, tender but charged. Emma spoke about her fears for the future, about the uncertainty of college, about the anxiety of leaving home, and Jake listened, offering support, understanding, and quiet reassurance. He didn't need to say that he cared, that he understood, that he wanted to be there for her. It was visible in every glance, every slight smile, every careful gesture. Emma felt that care, and it settled in her chest like a warm presence, a quiet anchor in the middle of uncertainty. Jake, in turn, shared small worries, subtle frustrations, fleeting fears about growing up and the challenges that lay ahead. Emma listened attentively, offering soft encouragement, gentle teasing, and sincere empathy. The dialogue, though simple, was charged with meaning, with emotional resonance, with the kind of connection that can only be built over years of shared experience and deep understanding. Neither needed to force emotions, neither needed to rush or label, because the depth of their bond was clear, profound, and self-evident. As evening came, the house quieted, and they found themselves again in moments of solitude. Emma leaned against her doorframe, watching Jake organize books in the living room, a casual act that now carried subtle significance. Jake glanced up, caught her looking, and smiled softly, a silent acknowledgement of the day, of the past, of the connection that had deepened between them. Emma smiled back, feeling a quiet thrill, a gentle warmth that made her chest feel light and heavy all at once. They both understood that the handcuffs had been more than a prank. They had been a catalyst, a trigger for awareness, a doorway into new emotional territory. Night fell, and both retreated to their rooms, but the house felt different, as if the walls themselves recognized the shift. Emma lay on her bed, thinking of Jake, of the closeness, of the emotional intimacy, of the way ordinary gestures now carried extraordinary weight. She realized that love and connection could be subtle, could exist without labels, could thrive in the space between words and actions. Jake, in his room, stared at the ceiling, feeling the same quiet understanding, the same delicate awareness of feelings that were real, important, and enduring. Neither rushed to define it, neither tried to act impulsively, but both knew that the bond they shared had forever changed, that their hearts had recognized a depth they could not ignore. The following morning, they greeted each other with casual smiles, yet beneath the surface, a gentle undercurrent of connection flowed between them. Small touches lingered longer, glances carried weight, and shared laughter felt richer, filled with subtext and awareness. They moved through the day with the knowledge that their relationship was now more nuanced, emotionally richer, and quietly romantic in its intensity. Every shared moment became a thread weaving a tapestry of trust, care, and subtle longing, a bond strengthened by circumstance, accident, and emotional honesty. Even as ordinary life continued, the chores, the schoolwork, the family routines, the memory of the handcuffs, the living room, the quiet closeness lingered. It became a touchstone, a reminder that emotional connection could be profound, beautiful, and transformative without needing labels or actions beyond awareness and care. Emma and Jake navigated their days with new sensitivity, new understanding, and a quiet joy in the private knowledge that they mattered to each other in ways that words could never fully capture. By the time evening returned, with soft shadows stretching across the walls, they found themselves together in the living room again. Not by accident, not by necessity, but by choice, each seeking the other's presence, the quiet comfort, the emotional intimacy that had grown since the incident. They shared silence, shared glances, shared laughter, and in every moment, there was the unspoken acknowledgement that their bond had changed forever. The handcuffs were gone, the physical connection removed, but the emotional tie, the understanding, the quiet longing and affection remained stronger than ever. And as they sat together, shoulders brushing, hearts quietly aware, they understood that life would continue, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. And in that understanding, in that suspended awareness of closeness and connection, they found something rare, beautiful, and enduring, a gentle adult bond that would stay with them always,